Would you like to go over some skills that you might see in your upcoming certification exam? My name is Sarah Hall, and I'm the reading specialist here at the Learning Liaisons. Before we jump into some concepts, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the Learning Liaisons YouTube channel. Always remember, it's not if you pass, it's when you pass. Let's go ahead and get started in Competency 1, Knowledge of Research and Theories of Reading Processes. This component of the exam will take up 10% of the entirety of the test, but we will go over everything together. Skill 1 says to identify characteristics and sources of valid reading research. So when we're talking about valid research, that's our key word there is validity. So let's talk about what validity means when we're talking about research. If I want to make sure that the research I am studying or the data from a research study I'm using is valid, there's several things I'm going to need to keep in mind. Let's first talk about what the actual word validity means, though, when we are discussing research. Validity means that the match between the content of the study and the data is there. So I need to be able to see the exact correlation between the study and the data. When I am reading through research, or when you're looking at research to use in your class, maybe you're using it to justify why you need a certain program, or you're trying to find out if there's a program that you should implement or not. Looking at the validity is going to help you determine really the intent of the researcher. The intent of what the researcher is telling you they are going to collect data for should actually match their data. Let me give you a real-world example for this. Let's say that you were reviewing some research and the researcher told you that they were going to make a correlation between third grade students who practice reading at home and who also attend a Title I school, and then their performance on a state test. Well, if we were to dig deeper into that data and realize that the students that were assessed for this data were reading at home and did take a state assessment but weren't from a Title I school, then the data doesn't match the research. It doesn't match the intent of what the research was looking for. So that's going to be really important to keep in mind. So again, we need to consider if the research is valid, and that validity is telling us, does the intent match? Does the research match the data? Another thing to keep in mind is if there's an author cited. Now, we probably won't know every single author that is out there in the field of reading research, and that's okay. If it's an author that you haven't heard of and that maybe you don't know is exactly reputable, then also consider looking for a peer review. A lot of times, more established researchers will lend a peer review so that you know that the information in the research that you are reviewing and potentially using is from an author you can trust. The next component we're going to look at in the validity of reading research is reliability. And when we are talking about reliability within research, we really want to make sure that the data stays true over time. Again, let's put this in a real-world example for you. If you were to give a diagnostic assessment in your classroom, which means that you're giving just what we would call maybe a dipstick test, you're just taking a temperature read on how your students are doing, then if you give that same assessment tomorrow, your data should pretty much align. Now, if you waited 3 months, 6 months, or even a year to reassess, that data is going to be quite different. But reliability means that from a day-to-day standpoint, our data is going to align. So not only are we looking for validity, we're also looking for reliability. Another thing to consider is if there is a primary source given within the research. Now, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek example, but if you were to come to me and tell me, Sarah, I want to tell you something that my next door neighbor's uncle's best friend told me, I might stop you and think to myself, is this really going to be accurate information? Or is this like when we played telephone when we were kids? By the time it gets to a second or a third source, you've lost a little bit of the information. The same is true in research. You want to make sure that you are being given information from a primary source. So if the author is sharing information from research that they have given themselves, then you're in a good place. If it is removed more than twice, you really want to find research that's going to have more of a primary source. The last thing to consider when looking at the validity of reading research is if there is advocacy for a resource. Again, I'm going to put this in a classroom example for you. Let's say that you were called into a professional development meeting or a staff meeting, and you were reviewing research based on a potential resource or tool or even program that you were going to implement in your classroom for reading instruction. You would want to stop and think about, am I being persuaded in any way by this research? So again, pretend that you're in a meeting and you're going over a new reading program to see if it's something you want to implement in your classroom. You're looking at the data and the research aligned to this program, and it'll probably lend itself really closely to showing you that this is a program that you're going to want to implement. But stop and think to yourself, am I being persuaded to buy something? Is this more of an independent research approach, or am I really being pushed to a product here? So again, is there advocacy for a specific resource, or is this really just a blanket research study that I can use for, again, maybe a tool, a strategy, or an approach, not necessarily a tool or a program? So that concludes skill 1 on valid reading research. We're going to go ahead and move into skill 2 now. Okay, so now we are moving into skill 2. Skill 2 says that we need to identify foundational theorists and differentiate among theories of reading processes and development. Before we even go through these names, though, I want to alert your attention to something on the right-hand side of your screen. You should see an image of a pencil, and that is your cue that this slide aligns with one of your handouts. So whenever you see this image of the pencil, make sure you find the handout slide that corresponds with this content. I'll make sure to alert you to that as well, and go ahead and start taking some notes. Again, if you don't get some comprehensive notes written down or you feel like you missed some information, don't worry. After we go over this content, I will be recapping with you. I will have slides on my screen that look identical to your handouts, and we'll make sure we're on the same page and you have some really great notes moving forward. If you look at these 9 researchers, these are the theorists and the theories that we're going to cover. Remember, this exam is really digging deeper than that superficial knowledge. So it's not just about knowing who these 9 theorists are. It's really digging deeper and knowing how they also affect your classroom and your instruction. So it's the implications that lie beneath the theories as well. We have to start with that foundation, though. So I'm going to go over all 9 theorists and then we'll dig deeper. Also, you're probably going to be thinking as I go through some of these theorists that you recognize some of their names, and that's awesome. You may even remember their theory, and again, that's great. So stay with me as I review all of them, and then again, we're going to dig deeper and look at all of the implications for a reading classroom. The other mindset I want you to continue to have moving forward is that you probably do a lot of these things already in your classroom, which is awesome, and we know that you're amazing teachers. But again, this is through the scope of a kindergarten through 12th grade lens. So whatever grade you teach, remember, we're making those connections between this content in your classroom, but then also every reading classroom from kindergarten through 12th grade. All right, are you ready to get started on the 9 theorists? Here we go. Their names are Lev Vygotsky, Jean Piaget, B.F. Skinner, Jerome Bruner, Howard Gardner, Louise Rosenblatt, Noam Chomsky, Paulo Freire, and Benjamin Bloom. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide together. Skill 3 says that we also need to be able to not just know these theorists, but relate instructional applications to theories of reading processes and development. So as we move through the next slides together, again, we're going to be talking about the theorists, but I'm also going to be sharing with you their theories and the implications for K-12 reading classrooms. So we're going to combine the content for skills 2 and 3, and let's go ahead and get started with our first theorist. The first theorist we're going to cover is Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky created the theory of social development. Within social development is the zone of proximal development. That's the zone just beyond what a student can do independently. If you look at the image at the bottom of your screen of the 3 circles, you'll see that the bottom circle is where students can work independently. The middle teal circle is where students can learn with support. And then the green circle is what is out of reach. We are going to delve deeper into this on the next slide. But I also want to show you, before we move on, the idea of scaffolding. Vygotsky also developed the idea of scaffolding, which is the support needed to elevate students' ability to match their zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development is going to be different for every one of your students, and that's important to remember. Look now at the image of the scaffolding in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. This is scaffolding that you've probably seen while you're out and about driving and possibly saw at a construction site. So I want to invite you to think for a moment, if you were driving past a construction site and let's say a wall on a new building was going up, think about why this scaffolding would be leaning up against the wall. You're probably thinking about the support that the scaffolding is giving that new wall, and you'd be absolutely correct. So I also want you to consider, not only is this scaffolding there for support, but it also doesn't just automatically go up with all the tiers in place at once. This really gets implemented one tier at a time, one layer at a time. The next thing I want you to think about is when you remove scaffolding. If I were working at this construction site and I was finished using this scaffolding for support, I wouldn't go over and kick it over and get rid of all of it at once. I would take it down layer by layer, tier by tier. And the same is completely true for our students. When we add support or take support away, we don't go all in with all the tiers already in place, and we also don't remove it all at once. It goes up tier by tier, and it comes back down tier by tier. So again, remember, when you're adding support for your students, we're adding it tier by tier, and then we're removing that support tier by tier as well. Let's go ahead and move into the next slide where we're going to look deeper at the image for zone of proximal development. All right, let's go ahead and look at this image a little deeper together. Again, if you look at the bottom circle, the purple circle, it says this is where your students have current understanding. They can work completely unassisted in this area. We would also call this their independent level. So this is where students don't need any support. They're completely successful independently. Let's look next at the middle circle, which is the teal color. This is the student's zone of proximal development. This is where students are going to learn through scaffolding and support. This is what we would call for the teacher the sweet spot. This is where you are able to add support, students are able to find success with that scaffolded support, and you can really offer that immediate feedback. If you look at the last circle, the green one, this is where the instruction you would be giving the student would be out of reach, even with support. This is what we might call their frustration level. So we really want to make sure as classroom teachers that we are offering support and scaffolding right there in that middle section. Again, that's their zone of proximal development, and we would call this the teacher's sweet spot. This is where you're going to be able to offer that immediate feedback, give support needed for each student, and then also remember that consideration that this is going to be different for every student as well. The reading implication for Vygotsky's theory is that we as teachers get the most bang for our buck in small group instruction. This is because we can really scaffold more intentionally and right in that moment. So let's think about what this would look like in your classroom in whole group instruction. Let's say you have 18 students in your classroom and you are giving instruction and providing instruction in a whole group lesson. There is no way that you would be able to really meet the needs through scaffolded support to every single one of your 18 students in that moment. So as a teacher, being able to pull a small group of maybe 3 or 4 students, you're going to be able to really meet their needs and know exactly how and when to scaffold for those students. What this might look like in your classroom is if you're pulling a small group and the rest of your students are either working independently or in literacy centers or stations. If you're working in a small group, it's also remember to have lots of resources at your fingertips because, again, this scaffolded support really should be in the moment so that you can really make the most meaning for your students. Another point to consider is that informal reading assessments are going to be what drive our instruction. So we need to know when and where to scaffold, and we're going to use those assessments to be able to tell us exactly what our students need. Let's look first, though, at small group instruction. So if you look at the picture on the left, you can see that a teacher is supporting a student in a small group lesson right there inside a reader or inside a text. The teacher is giving immediate feedback and giving support that that particular student needs. This is a great example of offering scaffolded support. If you look at the next picture, again, we see a teacher in a small group instruction model. Students each have a book in front of them. The teacher has an identical copy. And also you can see that there's lots of resources around her. Again, this is a great example of offering that scaffolded support in that moment where it's going to be most effective and meaningful for your students. We also talked about informal reading assessments really being able to drive our instruction and offering the diagnostic results that we need to be able to know what our students need from us. So this is by no means a comprehensive list of all the informal reading assessments that you may already use in your classroom, but